welcome to the Listenwise and Educational Duct Tape webinar about Appsmashing. Can we go to the next slide? My name is Brenna Stout, and I am joining you as a Listenwise account manager representative. I was a teacher in the classroom for 5 years, and I taught English as a foreign language, science, and social studies to middle school students. So that is my background, and now I am working with Listenwise to make sure all of our teachers have what they need to be successful in the classroom. And joining us today in our webinar is Jake Miller.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Brenna. So I am Jake Miller. I'm coming to you from Ohio right now. I am in year 20 in education. This year, I am a personalized learning specialist as my day job, getting to help educators personalize learning in their classrooms, which, spoiler alert, I think Listenwise is a great tool for doing that, but we'll get to that later. In my previous years in education, I've been a middle school teacher, science, math, STEM, and a technology integration specialist. And I spent a lot of time on the side working in the technology integration space. That's kind of one of my passions for sure, is talking about technology integration and how it could support student learning.
Next slide. All right, we're going to get started with a little icebreaker. So this is one of our Listenwise Weird News 30-second stories. So in the story, you're going to be listening for how much would you pay for some French fries. So go ahead and give us a listen.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. How much would you pay for French fries? What about really fancy fries? $200? That's what you'll spend at a restaurant called Serendipity 3 on Manhattan's Upper East Side. It's home to the world's most expensive fries, known as the creme de la creme pomme frite. Instead of the usual vat of frying oil and sea salt, these fries are made with champagne and truffles before they are topped with real edible gold dust. I'm sticking with the drive-through.
All right, so that's one of our famous Listenwise stories. And as you could see, they talked about a few vocabulary words throughout. So how much, if you can type into the chat, would you pay for French fries? Jake, what do you think your answer is?
Some ones with gold dust on them and cooked in champagne. I think I could go $20 for those fries, but I'm not going 200.
Yeah.
I'll try anything once though. So $20 just to try it.
Yeah, I guess so. They have to be super special. So in our webinar today, we are going to have a little introduction to Listenwise for those of you who are not familiar with Listenwise. You had a little preview, but we will talk more. And then we will have a discussion about what is educational duct tape EdTech integration and where does Listenwise fit into that mindset. And then at the end, we will finish up with Appsmashing with Listenwise. I like to set the scene for norms in our conversation. So I ask that you stay engaged, you are open and curious to learning. We honor each other's perspectives as we are all approaching these topics in our own way and in our own past. I ask that you chat often. Please feel free to chime into our conversation. We want to invite you to learn with us and share your stories and write down questions so we can discuss them at the end. But if they pop into your head throughout, please just share them because sometimes they don't come back. If there's anything else you would like to add to our conversation, please type it in the chat now. All right, so what is Listenwise? In the chat, scale of 1 to 5, how well do you know Listenwise? I am at a number 5. I know it very well, and 1 would be I am not familiar with it. So Listenwise, we use podcasts from lots of different organizations that help with our multilingual learners. We also, in our ELD lesson library, have videos that pair with our podcasts to help build some background knowledge. And in these podcasts, you'll hear authentic voices about things that students are learning in the classroom in order to help them learn and practice their listening skills. Because if you are like me, sometimes I hear a story and I want to tell it again and I'm like, I didn't listen well enough. So after we listen to stories, there are auto quizzes, teacher guides to help you out, and scaffolded supports, which are really helpful with your English language learners, and organizers, discussion questions, and we will get into more about each of these today. So really excited to share about Listenwise. And Jake, can you tell us about you?
Yeah, so I am the host and author, host of a podcast and author of a book. I can't author a podcast and host a book. That's not how it works. Called Educational Duct Tape and EdTech Integration Mindset. I've been talking about educational duct tape for, 6 or 7 years. The podcast started about 4 years ago. And on the next slide, you'll see kind of my definition of what an educational duct tape EdTech integration mindset is. It's the belief that, like duct tape, educational technology is at its most useful when it's not the goal of the lesson, but a tool used to solve a problem or meet a goal. So duct tape, you don't start your day off thinking, today I'm going to duct tape things. No, you think, today I'm going to make it through my day. Today I might have to fix something. And duct tape might be the tool that you use to solve that problem. It might be the tool. It's not the goal. It's not what you're trying to do. Also, the tool might be a saw or a hammer or a screwdriver. It's whatever tool meets the needs of that job. So whenever I think about educational technology, I think, what is it that we're trying to do as a teacher? What are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to do pedagogically or in terms of content? We're trying to teach our students. How are we trying to benefit them? How are we trying to help them access information? Whatever it might be, what are we trying to do? And what tools can help me with that? Sometimes they're tech-based and sometimes they're not, but I look at educational technology tools as tools, just that, tools. A lot of educators get overwhelmed by ed tech because they think there's so many tools, there's so much to learn. I can't keep up with all of them. You don't need to keep up with all of them. You need to keep up with the ones that address problems or needs or goals that you have. So that's what we talk, when I talk educational duct tape, that's what I mean. That's what I'm thinking about. So I have some questions here. And so in educational duct tape land, or in the podcast or in my book, I like to ask questions that a teacher might ask, right? So what are some goals or problems that a teacher might have? And then we see, is educational duct tape the answer to that? Is there an ed tech that's the answer to that? So Brenna, as our person who gave a 5 in the chat for how well you know Listenwise, I'm going to ask you these questions. How can we add engaging hooks to the beginnings of our lessons? So at the beginning of our lesson, how can I hook my learners into the content they're about to dig into?
Yeah, so just like I started off my webinar with you all to have a weird news story. It was quick, it was 30 seconds. We answered one question. It calmed us down, especially if we've been working all day or if our kids have been outside and then they come back in. So with a quick 30-second bell ringer, do now, students can get hooked and begin to ask questions at the beginning of a lesson.
I love that. I love that. What a great way to get a nice kind of quiet, calm start, but also get their gears turning in their brain, thinking about something, whether it's French fries or something else, right? My next question for you, during instruction, when I'm teaching the whole class, what if I want to bring primary sources in? What's a novel way that I could bring a primary source of information into my whole class instruction?
Yeah, so there are lots of different stories on Listenwise that you can really look at it from the first person point of view, and the primary source would be that first person and hearing it on the ground. So we have a lot of current events that you hear people who were there or at an event or a time period, and so that really helps. You can play it on the board, and then we have a karaoke follow along type of transcript that is highlighted as the students are listening.
Yeah, I love that. I love that then there's the possibility that they can go and re-listen later if they need to, right? If they need to re-listen to aid their comprehension or to reflect on it. But having that whole group listening experience can really lead well into a discussion, I think, too, by doing that whole group like that. Now, sometimes, sorry, go ahead, Brenna.
We also know that when students listen to something whole group, it really builds empathy together with a cohesiveness. So I really like that.
They all experienced it together, right? I like that's a really good point there. When I think about, so I, as I said earlier, my day job is a personalized learning specialist. So I really focus a lot on every learner getting what that learner needs, right? So if I want to determine, maybe after this whole group lesson with the primary sources, if I want to determine which students do I need to work with a little bit more on something, which students are ready to go a little bit deeper with something, and which students are kind of right on target, if I want to kind of break apart my students and give them what they need, how can I assess student comprehension so that I could then in small group instruction know just what kids need my support on what? So how can I, maybe with that primary source audio, how can I assess that student comprehension?
Yeah. So in order to make sure that learning is personalized for students at Listenwise, you can make multiple copies of the same assignment and add different scaffolds. So students who maybe didn't understand level A, B, and C comprehension questions, maybe they have a different level of comprehension questions, and then you can really work on the small group to have various scaffolds. But you can assign them individually to the students. So group A, group B, and group C, they can all be working on the same listening, same story, but then have it broken down for that small group instruction.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that the questions you're alluding to at the end of the podcast or videos that you listen to or view in Listenwise, that there are those questions that can help you identify who needs those supports and what level of instruction they need, but also that they are scaffolded, right? As you said, like kind of like the level A, level B, level C, level D, there are kind of increasing depth of knowledge or increasing complexity or increasing along the learning progression of that content that gets deeper and deeper and deeper. So you really know where each of those learners are. I was really impressed with the questions and Listenwise there. You could tell a teacher's brain was at work when those questions were written, for sure. So we talked small group instruction, we talked whole group instruction. What about an independent work? So when we work with kids independently or when they're working on their own, that's when they could really access content in the ways that work best for them. So how can we how can we make the audio content accessible for students during that during that independent work? So how can we make it accessible for them during independent work?
Yeah, so when students are listening on their own, making sure that they have been trained and seen it before is really important. But then so that they can identify, oh, where is the little button that I press if I need this to slow down? So we have slowed audio about 20%. They also have that karaoke transcript that I was speaking of earlier, and they can follow along. And then the last piece that is really great for students to access is we have a search bar within our ELD lessons. So if students are struggling on a word or a topic, they can highlight it, and there's a picture dictionary, a regular dictionary. It's called the Text Help Toolbar, to really let students work independently and figure out and solve some of their problems on their own. And then once you are able to kind of send them into independent workstations, then you can have independent work. Then you can have a combination of these learning stations where they're highlighting one part of the story at each learning station. So one station they listen, the next station they move to make sure that they are doing a quiz, the next station they are answering comprehension questions. So independent work can also whole group instruction, small group instruction can be coordinated into these learning stations too.
Yeah, I love that when like learning stations are such a great idea because that gives you as a teacher time to work with small groups or work with individual students. But sometimes we could fall into the trap of giving busy work at the stations when they're not with us, right? And when you've got good quality content, like we just listened to a chunk of an NPR podcast a couple minutes ago, we've got good quality content for students to tune into. We know that they're not just doing busy work, they're getting some rich media experiences in what they're doing during that time. So what a great tool to add into learning stations.
Yeah, great. I think we're ready to move to the next slide, please.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So my next question, you kind of alluded to it in those comments about learning stations there. At least I heard it in my head, my teacher brain, the gears were turning there. And I started to wonder, I know the answer, spoiler alert, but how can I leverage educational technology to support the development of academic language? So how can we use the EdTech to support that language development?
Yeah, so we know that when students become better listeners, they become better learners. I know when I've taught my students how to listen in class, like they are able to pay attention more, and they can really just absorb a lot more information. So as you can see in this graph, our listening comprehension in students actually outweighs our reading comprehension until they are in about middle school, and then they become about the same. So when students are younger than middle school, they are learning to read. And then when they are older than middle school, they're reading to learn. And so we want to make sure that we are teaching those listening comprehensions so that they are learning while they are also learning to read. And then once you start talking about the benefits of academic language, they can really support in various ways. Some of the benefits that we found is providing background knowledge on complex topics without the mental load of additional reading. So just like I was sharing at these different ages when we're learning another language as well, making sure that we are trying to learn the content and also learn how to read and add those scaffolding supports. But the main goal is to build that content on these complex topics to kind of paint a whole picture.
Yeah, we know that cognitive load theory, right, says that if students are focused on too many things at once, it's hard for them to process all that information. So if we could take away the focus on the reading, right, and let them just focus on the content, that's going to lead to some richer understanding, as those quotes from that quote from Jennifer Gonzalez on Call to Pedagogy showed to us. So some of the other stuff that she cited in there too, that the research actually tells us that better listeners are better readers, that listening shapes our brain and our memory. And the act of listening to a good narrative helps our students become better learners. Studies have shown all of those things, as well as the one we see on the screen there. Listening while reading improves text reading rates and leads to higher comprehension. And if you ask teachers what they want for their students, especially learning readers, they want to improve those text reading rates and get that higher comprehension from them. So anything that does that, that's good news for sure.
So as well as improving the reading rates and being able to practice listening, that background knowledge we can really see built in Listenwise. And so on the next slide, we have a quick little video that we are going to watch about how to support multilingual learners by building background knowledge.
I've been talking a lot about the supports that help students understand, but we also understand that you need some guidance and help and time-saving methods, let's be honest. So we outline a sequence of activities that build understanding before, during, and after listening to stories. Tan, you did this just automatically. Before we listened, we talked about how we help someone. During the listening, we chunked it and asked questions. And after the listening, really, after every segment, you asked a question. And you could do that in the classroom too, with them turning and talking or shouting out the name and just getting really like they're involved, they're interacting with the story. And that makes it an exciting lesson. So really the lessons include a variety of opportunities for students to interact with the media and with each other to practice these skills and build academic language. For example, we also have listening organizers. You know, you had a drawing activity, and we have printables that do things like, some of it is language identification chart. So just when you hear a phrase, you could check it off. It's just a way to, again, a metacognitive strategy for note taking. Following along, and your mind wanders, but you can come back and look at where you are in the story. So that's another kind of great way to do that.
What I love, let me summarize what all the features of what Listenwise is doing as I'm listening to this. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you notice how we didn't make the content easier. This is the equity part. When we work with multilinguals, oftentimes things get dumbed down for them because, oh, pobrecito, they're just learning English. No. We're going to keep the mountain the same height, but we're going to give them multiple paths to get there. We're going to add different tools to that backpack so they can climb that summit. We're not making the mountain smaller. We're just giving more tools to summit the mountain. And that's what Listenwise and all the strategies we're doing here makes it accessible. If we ever make things easier for kids, this is a flag for equity. It's saying, do we think that multilingual students can achieve just like everyone else? And I didn't make this really difficult text. I didn't dumb it down. I just made accessing it more accessible.
I just love that video.
Yeah, I think that goes right hand in hand with the tools that you're talking about too. We just
Right.
need to add our tools into our toolboxes.
Yeah, I think it shows really well how we could scaffold access to content to support these multilingual learners without reducing the complexity. I love his comment of keeping the mountain the same height, but adding different tools so the students can summit the mountain. We want them all to summit the same mountain. They just need different tools for it. So don't reduce the complexity, give them the tools they need. So thinking about that mindset, like you mentioned, that educational duct tape mindset, if the question is, how can I make content more accessible for my students without decreasing its complexity, this kind of stuff is the answer. We don't want to take away the complexity. We just want to make it so that they could summit the same mountain as their classmates. So a couple different educational duct tape questions here. First one, how can we use authentic content to increase literacy skills? And you showed that graph earlier, Brenna, that great graph about how listening comprehension tends to be higher than their reading comprehension. We also know, you showed us about the French fries and all these different things, that Listenwise has this authentic content. So how can we use authentic content to increase literacy skills? Well, there you go. We could bring in some of this content from Listenwise, increase those literacy skills while using authentic content to our learners, right? Because there's new current events, there's these weird stories, there's this exciting stuff that kids would be authentically engaged in and interested in. The next question there, how can we help our learners develop empathy and appreciate different perspectives? Well, you said earlier, the act of everybody listening to the same story together at the same time gives all of them this shared sense of empathy. And anytime we listen to stories, we know that we often empathize more to stories that we listen to than ones that we read. So if we're hearing stories from different perspectives, and if we're listening to them, our empathy goes up, which I think we'd all agree is something we want our society to have now and for our learners to have in their future. And the final one there, how can we offer alternate pathways to accessing information? We were talking earlier about how to make some of those accessibility changes in Listenwise, like that text help toolbar with the dictionary and the picture dictionary and things like that, slowing down the story, looking at the transcript as we view. There's videos in there too, so we could access the information in different ways, because we want everybody to climb the same mountain, right? We just want to give them the tools that they need to do it. I think when we talk about personalized learning, which again is what I do in my day job, we talk about UDL, universal design for learning. We want things universally designed so that all of our learners have what they need to succeed. So we want to give access to all the same tools in their backpack so that they all can climb the same mountain. Some might not need some of the tools, while others will, but we want to give them those pathways that let them access that information. I think that's huge.
Yeah, that's great. And with a lot of our stories too, like, because students are coming from all different backgrounds and all different parts of the world, like sharing these stories about specific places or things that are happening around them can really be like, oh, wait, I've heard of that,
Mm-hmm.
in other places. And now we're learning about it in school. So it really allows for communication to happen about what's happening in their lives. So
Right.
One thing that we talk about a lot when we are thinking about listening and reading and writing and speaking is they are a puzzle and they kind of fit together. And if one puzzle piece isn't there, or if one puzzle piece is lacking, then we don't complete the full puzzle. So as we talk about these literacy domains, we're really want you to just think about, how do these fit together like four puzzle pieces of a puzzle? So we're going to think about how Appsmashing with Listenwise can help teachers across all four literacy domains. So how can we make sure we're helping students with listening, reading, writing, and speaking? In listening and reading, it's interpretive. How are we viewing the story? How are we taking in information? And then writing and speaking is, how are we expressing it? How are we taking what we understood, and how are we sharing that out? So how are we telling the next story, maybe? And so we've put together a comprehensive list of different ways that each of these apps can target these specific modes of communication.
Yeah. I think it's so important to point out that just doing one of these things doesn't give us the deep learning we're really hoping for. So that's what I like about these literacy domains, is that I know if a learner has done all four of these things, or at least multiple things in here, their learning is being deepened by it. Do you mind if I share about a couple of these tools here, Brenna?
Yeah, please do.
So obviously under listening, we love the idea of using Listenwise to listen to these short audio pieces and these podcasts. There's also Libby for ebooks is a great tool I use to listen to ebooks myself. We also don't think that listening should replace reading. It should be used alongside of it. They're the two domains that are that interpretive viewing domains. So we've got tools like Newsella, we've got for great current events articles and things like that that can be leveled for your readers. We've got ebook tools like Epic and Sora and Libby. We've also got Common Lit where students can get articles and information to read from and bring in, maybe they're from about the same exact topic, maybe from different perspectives, maybe from the same, but letting them view and interpret that information in different ways. And then we get onto the expressive piece. Now, for writing, obviously, there's plenty of different ways we could do it. And we certainly could do it on pencil and paper. But if we're thinking about doing it on technology, I love Jamboard, a great, easy place for students to write and then see each other's writing and comment on each other's writing and communicate about that writing. I love blogging tools like EduBlogs and Blogger are great tools for blogging. And then we've got tools like Book Creator where we can make ebooks, right? And put our writing into an actual ebook. And then Padlet is very similar to Jamboard because we could do that in there. And Hector, I see put in the chat there, familiar with Jamboard, but is not Appsmash with Listenwise. I think it's a great way. It's a very simple Appsmash, right? Everything in Listenwise has a link. Pop that link in the Jamboard. Ask students to respond, ask them to reflect, ask them to express their thinking using writing. And then on the speaking end of things, we've got Mote, which is a great audio recording tool, Anchor, which is great for podcasts, free to use to record your own podcasts, Flip, also for audio and video responses. And we could easily put a link to a Listenwise article and a Listenwise podcast and maybe a Newsella article in the Flip and say, listen to this, read this, and then respond to your classmates, right? And then I mentioned Book Creator and Padlet over on the left, but they also have audio responses in them. So we could also speak or write in there. That gives us kind of that access and engage UDL piece, engage in the way that works best for you.
I was thinking of one question is how might you use this outside of an ELA or ELD class setting to Appsmash? Like how might you use it in a science or social studies setting?
Yeah, well, my most recent role was an 8th grade science teacher. The year before this, I was in the 8th grade science classroom. And so there's, number one, there's current events that are happening with maybe astronomy or maybe the upcoming eclipse that we've got coming up next year, right? Or different things happening in space or in our climate or natural disasters or things like that. And so what a great way to use some of those current events. Listen to some content from Listenwise, read some content from on Newsella, assess students for comprehension in both of those, but then also use one of the the writing or speaking tools to then engage them in conversation about it. And by the time they're done, they've got deep understanding of the content. I've got deep understanding of where they're at with their comprehension, and they've also communicated with each other. So we've built this really cohesive environment that's what Appsmashing does, right? It adds different tools together to complete a job in a way that none of them could complete by themselves, right? If I'm going to build a shed in my backyard, I'm going to need a hammer and a saw and a drill and a tape measure and all of these things. That's Appsmashing, right? I can't do it with just one of those tools. I need multiple tools for it.
Yeah, and I know within a lot of these tools, they do have some access to reading and writing and speaking. And so maybe if it does seem overwhelming, not using them all in one day, but using, each piece to build out different parts of the unit can be really helpful. So
right. And it's a great reminder, Brenna, because we don't need to use all of the tools, right? Like just like we said earlier, we need the tools that solve a problem or meet a goal for you. So one thing you could do is use one of the listening, one of the reading, one of the speaking, and one of the writing. You do that, you've offered all 4 literacy domains. Nobody's going to judge you for not using all of the tools on the screen because you've given your students exactly what they need by using something out of every category there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as you're speaking of how you might take these and add them into, well, okay, so now I want to use them, but how do I use them in my classroom?
Right. Yeah. So I like to think about a multimedia or multimodal text set, right? So having students explore information, whether it's again something about the upcoming eclipse that we're having next April, and learning about eclipses and maybe the history of eclipses and what's going to happen and what parts of the world we're going to be able to see it from. Well, wouldn't it be great for them to see it in video form and listen to something about it, a podcast about it, and read something about it, right? So we want a space where we could curate it. And there's really no right answer. There's plenty of different places we could curate that content for our students to access it. But I've got two examples here. One on the left is Padlet. I added a video, a Listenwise audio piece, and a Newsela article. And on the right, I did the same thing with Wakelet. And you can see I was in a basketball mood last night because my son's 7th and 8th grade team won the championship this past weekend. So I was thinking I had basketball on the brain. So I put in some articles and audio and video about Michael Jordan and LeBron James. I'm curious, and if anyone wants to put in the chat, where would you curate a multimedia or multimodal text set, if not one of those tools? Where would you do it? Because there's really no wrong answer. There's lots of right answers.
Well, as you were thinking about basketball last night, or when you were creating this, I was thinking about chocolate and two ways that chocolate could be used in the classroom. So we know in a lot of these tools, they also have, access to some of the other ones. We always say that Listenwise is rooted in listening, but then throughout our lessons, we have access to speaking, reading, and writing activities. And same with Newsela, theirs is rooted in reading, but they also have space for writing activities. So you might choose a topic like chocolate and then read a Newsela story together as a class, and then do a writing assignment to make sure students are understanding what is so great about dark chocolate. Obviously, it's the taste. And then you could have them learn about the history of chocolate in a Listenwise article, and they can watch some videos on there to build some background knowledge to make sure they understand fully, and then listen to the podcast, and then have a speaking activity where maybe they're doing a step up and step down debate about their views on the history of chocolate. So there's lots of different activities that you can build out with both Newsela and Listenwise, and really focusing on those 4 domains of literacy. And speaking more of chocolate, another way to do building this out is we talked about these 4 literacy domains and how they can build off of each other. And one teacher that I've worked with in the past really talked about how this chocolate bar of hers, the students were listening to a story about being kind to others and building that empathy, hearing those stories, and then they were able to share their perspectives of the story and what they liked and what they didn't like. And then with that, students had to choose a passion project, something that they were passionate about. And then they built their own podcast, really sharing what they were passionate about. And I remember doing something like this as a child, but with a 3-sided display board. And now students are doing passion projects using podcasts. So I think it's really great to see how students are using technology to evolve in that way.
I definitely remember those display boards.
Yeah. And then another teacher that we worked with used a few different processes when he was also making his students create their own podcast. This is a great end of year project, I think, especially around this time of year when testing is done, spring break is over, and now we have this time. So really diving into these building podcasts and passion projects. So you can read here his process of how he did this. And he used Flip to record some of the podcasts. Jake, have you recorded with Flip podcasts before?
Oh, I am a huge fan of Flip because it lets the teacher really see what the student understands, and the teacher can decide whether or not to make those responses from the learners public to their classmates or not. So it could just be, between the teacher and the student, maybe for assessment purposes, right? Or it could be a collegial kind of learning thing where all of the kids are learning from each other, responding to each other, sharing with each other, and developing that. Either one's correct, right? Either one's a good option. But that ability to then do that speaking, like we said earlier, with those 4 literacy domains is huge.
Yeah, and in here on the next slide, we can see one of the debate organizers that the students got to fill out. So they had to choose their stance, and then they practice their writing skills to really write out, why is this your reasoning? Explain this. So then when it came time to record their debate, they had it written down. They were really ready to go, and then they were able to practice that writing, speaking again, reading each other's debate stories to proofread theirs, and then speaking when they created the podcast.
Yeah, thinking about some of the stuff you shared earlier, right? If listening increases empathy and the students are recording their own flips and hearing each other, they're feeling more empathy towards each other, which is huge. And by the way, Flip just added the ability to have a teleprompter on screen while you're recording too, that nobody else can see but the student recording. So now they could put that script, that organization into the teleprompter and read right from there too.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
And then one last way that you could use podcasts is a teach, art, pair, and defend. So on Fridays, we often release debate podcasts, and you can find our archive debate podcast, and you can brainstorm ideas on, well, which side of the story do you want? And then use step up, step down debates to really incorporate some of those activities into your lessons. So moving on to our last question of the evening. So how can we combine ways for students to flexibly access and engage with content? So what can we do to help them?
Yeah, so you were kind of going through some examples where that's happening, right? They're engaging with content they're accessing that content multiple ways. They're engaging with it in multiple ways, and then they're expressing it in multiple ways too, right? So when we do something like that, when we app smash, we've got to kind of put it all in the same spot. If you think about giving an 8-year-old 5 different tabs on their computer to go and access and do things, like they're going to be all over the place, right? So we really need to kind of put it together and maybe develop that pathway to lead students through how they can flexibly access and engage with that content. So we've got on the next slide here a couple different ways that we could do this. There's certainly other options. One is a hyperdoc, which they're typically made in Google Docs, but they don't have to be. And in a hyperdoc, you put all of the elements of the lesson kind of in order, maybe with some choices there too. Students kind of click and just go through them in order. So we could have our Listenwise audio, we could have our Newsella article, we could have our flip to respond to, for example. A playlist is actually a pretty similar idea where they go in order through content. Choice boards obviously means they make some choices as they go through it. And just recently, I was learning about the grid method. I don't know if you're familiar with the grid method. It's kind of similar to a playlist. It uses a grid format and leads students from low complexity with the task, with a topic, all the way up to high complexity. So they can move through that content flexibly at their own pace, learning things at their own level. And then obviously we could do that within a learning management system too, a series of links in Google Classroom, Schoology, wherever we need to be. So taking those tools and putting them somewhere where students can access them so that they can get it in just the way they want to, which is the pace they need to too.
Yeah, great. It's making sure that they can find their work is very important.
Right. And talking about education and about educational technology is kind of my jam, and I geek out about it. So if somebody's watching the video right now, or if somebody that's on live with us right now thinks of something later and they have a question, like I am more than willing to respond to that question on any of those links there for sure.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. If you are still on the call, or if you are watching this later and you have a smartphone, you can scan these next 2 QR codes. And if you are interested in a free school trial from now to the end of the year, maybe, if you get some other teachers to sign up with you, or if you're interested in a district pilot from now to the end of the year, you can take these QR codes and be in contact with our sales team. So thanks everyone so much. Thanks, Jake.
No, thank you for having me. This was a blast. I love talking about it.